So as we've been discussing, it is a complete mess in New York and a lot of other cities across the country right now. I want to bring on somebody who understands the law enforcement side of this very well here in New York, and just as a general matter, his expertise is in law enforcement. Jon Cardillo, formerly of the NYPD, joins us now. He's also a TV host and podcaster and a guy that you should all be following on Twitter. John, great to have you on, man.
Always great to see you, Buck.
All right, let's start with this. I was watching last night in real time as there was looting going on in my neighborhood, John. I mean, I could actually see one of their shattered storefronts from where I'm sitting right now, okay? That's how obvious this was. It's in Midtown Manhattan. We're supposed to have the biggest concentration of police force here anywhere outside of Washington, D.C. in the whole country. D.C.'s got its own problems. Where was the NYPD, man? What is going on here?
Look, it's the NYPD is there, right? And the NYPD's manpower has stayed pretty consistent. In fact, back when I was on the job, it was it would have been, if it were an army, the 38th largest standing army in the world, right? Like 40,000 sworn. So I only say that to highlight the fact that the resources in New York City are there. Bill de Blasio won't use them. Buck, I am hearing things from the men and women I'm friendly with who are still on the job. I mean, when I'm telling you texts throughout the night, every half hour, he's refusing to deploy the resources that are trained to handle disorder. It makes no sense to anybody. He's having the cops restrain themselves. He's not allowing the special units. The mounted unit, for example, has been ordered to stand down. The NYPD mounted unit is one of the most effective disorder control units in the world. So your guess is as good as mine as to de Blasio's motives. The NYPD has the ability to quash this. De Blasio won't let them.
I mean, I'm hearing from guys that one of the problems that's come up is that the coverage that you see tends to be, in cities of the big stores, the big names that get looted. And understandably, that also makes for the most compelling images. But there was looting up in Fordham Road, up in the Bronx. There's looting in other places going on in the city. I mean, aren't these guys? And by the way, your point about the NYPD, I totally see eye to eye with you on. They're not being allowed to do what they got to do. But it's just particularly galling when anybody could be sitting here calling the cops saying, hey, I know where the bad guys are. And unless the bad guys are dragging somebody out in the street and, beating them with sticks, the cops somehow it's not a priority here right now because of the top down orders from City Hall.
Yeah, look at the Brooklyn DA put out a tweet yesterday asking for people to provide him information on cops that are acting brutally. He didn't have a tweet out there saying, send me information on rioters and looters. So it's not just de Blasio, it's the radical leftists citywide. And the most tragic part of this, Buck, you spent some time with NYPD on the intel side. You know how this all plays out. The most tragic part of this is when I went to work up in the Bronx, I was policing a 99% non-white area. And 98% of the residents are good, hardworking people, just trying to raise their families and do the right thing. And in those neighborhoods, you typically only have one or two grocery stores, one or two drugstores. Those places are destroyed. So now these people who don't have a lot of money to begin with have nowhere to buy groceries, nowhere to buy Advil, nowhere to buy paper towels, the basic necessities.
Right.
It's truly tragic. And guys like de Blasio sit by and let it happen. It is infuriating.
Now, and we're speaking to Jon Cardillo, formerly of the NYPD. He's a TV host and commentator. John, what would you think would need to happen here? And I've got to ask, because the president's saying he may invoke the Insurrection Act, which means sending in U.S. military to the streets here to help out. Can not just New York, because, this is a national show. You got people all across the country who are wondering, what about, my city or the nearest city to me? Can local police handle this kind of organized anarchy? Or do they really need, in at least some of the biggest hotspots, military to get called in to assist?
Well, look, it depends on the department, right, Buck? Because that's an issue of sheer numbers. The NYPD absolutely can handle it on their own. LAPD, the Chicago PD, they're larger agencies. But they're anomalies, really, in the grand scheme with the tens of thousands. The LAPD is around 12,000. I think Chicago, 15 to 20,000. NYPD, close to 40,000. They're really large agencies. I'm down here in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, where I live. Their PD has a few hundred bodies. Miami has about 1,000, 1,200. And so in those instances, I'd first like to see state law enforcement come in and help them out, then state National Guard. But look, I read the Insurrection Act. The 2005 revision is pretty clear. The president now has legal cover if mayors and governors won't protect their citizens. And I thought the president did a masterful job with his speeches over the last couple of days by saying, look, I'm giving you one more chance, governors, mayors. You've got to get this under control. But if you can't, I'm going to step in. I think he has political cover, and it may very well come down to him having to do that in the areas that are out of control that don't have large enough departments.
Tactically, do you think it's going to require, and again, I don't mean to focus on New York too much, but I'm here and things are getting rough here. How has it been? I mean, you're down in Florida, John. Is Miami or are any of the major cities down there getting hit badly with the looting and the riots too?
No, not really, because they happened in downtown Miami, an area called Bayside, right next to the American Airlines Arena where the Heat played big concerts. The stores got banged up. They lost some merchandise to looting, some windows. But the Miami PD they didn't have handcuffs on. The mayor let them do what they needed to do. Here in Fort Lauderdale, we had Broward Sheriff's Office and Fort Lauderdale PD on Las Olas Boulevard, the main drag. There were protesters, but they were never allowed to get out of hand. The police surrounded them. And we had a curfew last night here of 9 p.m., and there was no unrest. And today, everything's back to normal. There really is a contrast, Buck. It's a visible contrast when the police are allowed to do that. And I don't mean be heavy-handed and brutal, just do their jobs within policy, as opposed to cities like New York where they're not even being allowed to do that. So Florida's been in pretty good shape so far.
Now, what would take us through the tactical escalation that would be commensurate with what we're seeing in some, the Macy's looting, for example. You got 100 people or so. It's on video. Everyone can see it for themselves online. You got over, let's say 100 people roughly who are gathered outside, running in and out of the store. How do police, when they're allowed to do their jobs, how do they handle that situation?
NYPD has the SRG, the Strategic Response Group. They used to be called Task Force. Back in the day, and they are trained specifically for this, for disorder control. They have the tools, the non-lethal devices. They train in forming different maneuvers with phalanx of police to block the looters and rioters from these stores, from these businesses, or if need be, go in and extricate them safely. But they're not being allowed to do that. So clearly, the first thing you want to do is you want to block them, right? You want to form perimeters around targets of opportunity. But if you can't do that, then you rely on those tactics and training that enable you to go in and make the apprehensions. None of that's happening. A lot of this, we do in the NYPD level 1, 2, 3, 4 mobilizations. Well, I think this is the third or fourth time in history a level 4 mobilization was ever called. That was encouraging. Well, they called the mobilization, and then when all those cops, those thousands and thousands of cops were where they needed to be, they were essentially told to stand there and do nothing. That's the problem.
Yeah, my friend, I spoke to an
NYPD
friend this morning, and he said, "Yeah, we've got all the non-lethals you can think of. The NYPD for crowd control dispersals, like we've got them all. They're just sitting in warehouses. We're not using them." I said, "Well, if you're not using them now, when the heck are you using them?"
Yeah. I mean, look, I think we're at a point, and this isn't hyperbole, this isn't sensationalism, where Andrew Cuomo needs to seriously consider removing Bill de Blasio as mayor of New York City, because Bill de Blasio is clearly incompetent. He either won't or doesn't know how to, or is simply too terrified to restore order in the city. But unfortunately, the police commissioner in New York is appointed, not elected. They report to the mayor. The mayor effectively runs the department. De Blasio won't do the job. Maybe it is time for a serious conversation among New York Democrats about removing the guy from office.
Yeah, I have not been able to find a single person who works on the police force here who thinks that de Blasio is anything other than a complete and utter disaster. Just John, also, I wanted to ask, at the national level now, we're seeing this happen again. What are we supposed to take away from how this will affect police's ability to do their jobs in every jurisdiction across the country going forward? I mean, as a guy who used to wear a badge and carry a gun and put himself in dangerous situations, what does it mean? What does it say to you when it seems like police went from weeks of we have to clap for them as first responders so that we have to stay in our homes with COVID, right? Remember that. If I didn't stay home, I was putting our first responders like cops in jeopardy, to now, they're a bunch of racist murderers. What do you take away from all that?
Well, the left is never going to be satisfied. Look, they did it on the federal level, right? For 2 years, we were told, trust Comey and McCabe, the FBI, federal law enforcement, they're godlike. And then yesterday, the Secret Service was called jackbooted thugs for protecting the president when he walked over to St. John's. I mean, so, but what this is doing, you know, Buck, there's a real contrast in how appointed police chiefs in Democrat-run cities are handling this as opposed to how elected sheriffs are handling it. The elected sheriffs, they're backing up their deputies. They're giving them the resources. They're allowing them to do what they need to do. They tend to be more conservative. It is ridiculously demoralizing. I message upon message, text upon text, cops saying, look, we're done. We're off this job. We're looking for something in the private sector. And that was really highlighted by that cop in NYPD who was suspended for drawing his weapon. Well, now the evidence is out. He drew his weapon when one of the rioters hit his lieutenant, a female lieutenant, over the head with a brick. I can tell you, as a guy who went through the New York City Police Academy and policed New York City, what he did is what you are taught to do. That is exactly the escalation of force you are taught in the police academy. For doing it, Buck, de Blasio demanded he be suspended. How can anyone remain a cop in New York City and feel safe?
Yeah, no, I feel this. I feel that way for the police force. I also feel that way just as a resident of this city now who's not allowed. I mean, yeah, but you could tell me that I could pay the $500 and wait the 6 months and get a premise permit that I'd have to keep in a lockbox with a trigger guard on it and also ammunition in a separate lockbox. I mean, that's good. So I've got lockboxes full of firearms and ammunition if I were to have one that I could throw at somebody in an extreme situation. But otherwise, I'm going to need about 7 minutes to actually get to my gear. But John, I also, because you were one of the very few, and we're speaking to Jon Cardillo, TV host, follow him on Twitter. He does not hold back on the Twitter takes, my friends. He's also former NYPD. You were one of the few people, and I put myself in this category, but you're one of the few people who was willing to challenge the lockdown consensus. So switching to COVID-19 for a moment, I was at a protest yesterday covering it, thousands and thousands of people together. We were propagandized to for weeks by the media saying that this was basically putting people's lives in jeopardy to go out to a store or, you know, if there were too many people together. And now there's this. Yeah. This was all a fraud.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. And I'll tell you this, and not because we're old friends and I'm on your show. Your content I was retweeting constantly and I was directing people to read it. It was spot on with the lockdowns. Your analyses were great. It was, look, I've never been a fan of nanny statism. I've been very vocal about that. And when, you know, down here in Florida, where we supposedly were going to be the worst in the country because we have a large elderly population, it was anecdotal, I'll admit, but I wasn't seeing the numbers bear it out. And what I was seeing were these Democratic mayors who just were like waving, like little kids in the back of the classroom, pick me, hoping the National Democratic Party would give them some attention if they could be a little more draconian, a little more heavy-handed. And I realized pretty quickly that the lockdown schema was really about control. It had nothing to do with any sound public health policy. It wasn't science-based. What did it for me was when I was sitting with a neighbor who's, two neighbors actually, who are surgeons. One who's right next door, 2 houses over, and another who we belong to the same beach club. He's a surgeon, and they both said, this is nonsense. It's not science-based. We've looked at this virus. This is ludicrous. There is no need for these mass lockdowns. And more doctors started coming out with it. And here I am watching the elderly communities here in South Florida, and there weren't these, mass casualties. It became evident to me, Buck, that this was all about seeing how much control, especially Democrats, could grab. But look, I'm going to place equal blame. Governor Mike DeWine in Ohio, he acted like a Democrat through this. He even aligned with a Marxist public health group and excused it away. So this was really, I think, an exercise in what can we get away with from politicians who are just power drunk.
Jon Cardillo, everybody. Follow him on Twitter if you're not already. Also, look for him. He hosts TV. He's somebody you'll hear on radio. You'll hear him again on this show, too. John, thanks so much for your time.
Always good to be with you, Buck. Thanks.
Unfortunately, with the rioting that is occurring in many of our cities around the country, the voices of peaceful protest are being hijacked by violent radical elements. Groups of outside radicals and agitators are exploiting the situation to pursue their own separate and violent agenda. In many places, it appears the violence is planned organized and driven by anarchic and left extremist groups, far left extremist groups, using Antifa-like tactics, many of whom travel from outside the state to promote the violence. We must have law and order on our streets and in our communities, and it is the responsibility of the local and state leadership in the first instance to halt this violence.
Bill Barr, as I've been telling you all along, is a huge asset to the administration, and the Attorney General knows what he's talking about here. Antifa is involved in a lot of this, but I also would note that based on now, how do you know if someone's Antifa? They will often tell you. They will dress in black bloc gear. They will hold up signs or slogans of Antifa. So there are some signifiers. They'll have the A in a circle for anarchy, either tattooed on their necks or their foreheads or, somewhere on their clothing. But you can't always tell. I bring this up, though, because in some of the looting that we've seen videos of, it's not Antifa. There's no reason to believe that some of the mass looting that has happened has anything to do with Antifa. And I think that we're reading into things something that's not there when we assume that there is this organized left-wing group that is always present, or that is almost always present in the lootings and in these situations. Sometimes it's just mob street looting. Sometimes it's just people from the community who have decided that they're going to get a pair of sneakers, that they're going to steal a fancy handbag or whatever it may be. What do we do about this? No one seems to have, other than from the law enforcement perspective, a crackdown. But what do we do about this in terms of messaging? How can we convince people who seem to take some degree of glee in this anarchy, this theft, this destruction, that what they're doing harms all of us, and it's not worth it even if they don't get caught? There's a shame that people who have engaged in this looting. Now, I know you'd say, Buck, some of them are sociopaths and they have no conscience, and I'm sure that's true. And perhaps of many of them, I couldn't tell you. I don't know what the percentages are. I'm not a psychologist, and we're not doing a deep dive in everyone's mind here. But there will be people who are caught up in the moment, and perhaps they walked past a store as it was being looted, and they decided, maybe I'll go grab something. And that will stay with them. Whether they recognize it or not, that dishonor will stain them for a very long time afterwards. Where are the voices out there that I know that they'll be ignored perhaps by 90% of the looters? I don't know, maybe 50, maybe 90, who knows? But where are the voices that are saying that there is it's not just about the disorder and the lawlessness, but also the dishonor that these people are bringing on themselves by engaging in these tactics? They may think that because there's anger out there, anger on the streets, and CNN and MSNBC are giving voice to this, people are mad, that's a justification. But that will fade in time as they grow older and understand more of what life is really all about. Maybe I'm just thinking in a way that doesn't make any difference right now, but I just feel like there could be voices out there who say to everybody, we're better than this. No matter what's going on, we're better than this. I know people feel that way. Where are those voices?
I know people see violence and think that people are just taking advantage of the situation, and there may be some people who are. I don't know that every single person is doing this born out of pain, but I can tell you many people are. We've seen it. They don't know what to do with that emotion, so their response, especially young folks, is to lash out. And one of the young folks, we talked to him on your show. You had him on your show. A young man who was from Minneapolis who said, do you see all this damage here? You don't listen to us when we speak, so you listen to us now, don't you? So acting out gets attention. And they know that because the other way hasn't gotten them the attention. It hasn't done anything. It hasn't changed anything. So they're hoping this will. Will it? I don't know. I was in Ferguson in 2014 for 3 months. We're back here again. Same scenario, just about. There wasn't a gun involved. There was a knee involved.
There you go. There's the pseudo-intellectual bend over backwards explanation you can expect from CNN about the violence, the looting, the arson on the streets. People are angry and they don't feel heard. Okay. How is this going to make them feel heard? Who's supposed to hear them? Do they think that anybody who believes that law enforcement serves a valuable and essential purpose and that we should respect our law enforcement officers is going to all of a sudden decide to defund the police or have dramatic police reform based on breaking into a Nike store and running off with a bunch of shoes? What exactly are we supposed to take away from that? People don't feel heard. What do they want to feel heard about? And let's also remember that if people are demanding that their voices are heard, they also have to subject themselves to responses. So when people say things who are upset, like the police are racist and are routinely and systematically killing young black men, other people get to turn around and say, well, hold on a second. That's actually a dishonest framing of the issue. That's not correct based on the facts. And that's a gross exaggeration of what is happening in this country. And it also is a defamation of the police. Oh, no, but people are angry, so that's all that matters. The rage justifies the conduct. I ask, what are the outer limits to that? When have you gone too far then with the rage? What if it wasn't just looting stores? What if it was actual intentional acts of violence against human beings? We have seen violence, and we've seen far too much of it already. But I mean, what if they started just going around and grabbing people at random and beating them because they're angry? Would we submit to that? Well, I mean, there's historical injustice that we're being told about. There's anger within certain communities about police behavior. So what's acceptable? Looting, it seems, is within the realm of discourse that the left is willing to defend here. And let me also just answer this, again, pseudo-intellectual babble on CNN, which is what you'll get about this. They're not going to condemn it. You will not have an anchor express righteous indignation about the repeated, systematic, widespread violation of laws. And these are laws that hurt people. Notice how the libs on the Logan Act with General Flynn or on George Papadopoulos under oath, oh, the law is the law. If you break the law, you pay the price. And those are laws in which, don't even get me started about how it was entrapment and they lied and the whole thing was a deep state setup. But even if what they said was true and it was not, nobody was hurt. There's no victim. There's no person who's going to go into court and say, oh, General Flynn's lie to the FBI ruined my life. But the left was claiming in those instances and those situations that there is, in fact, an urgent need for justice, that there is, in fact, a situation where you have to punish these people, right? Flynn, Papadopoulos, Scooter Libby. I mean, these, lying under oath. Oh, anybody who lied to the Mueller probe, lock them up, lock them up. When you break into a store and you steal merchandise, you are taking from people and you are violating them. You are hurting employees. You are hurting owners. When you ruin a small business, you might be putting a family out on the street. There are real victims of these acts. Where's the indignation about that? Where's the anger from people who have platforms, who have the ability to really have their voices heard? Oh, no, they're too busy at CNN, for example, saying just inane garbage like this from Bro Cuomo. Too much creatine for Bro Cuomo to really think straight these days. Play clip 6.
The idea of pro-life, the Christian political position seems to be, no. Unborn life. We are in favor of protection of unborn life. Once it's born, then we don't have the same feelings anymore.
This is really what Cuomo wants us to hear. He thinks this is intelligent. I mean, this guy's he's a bonehead. I mean, he's a buffoon. But he's telling you that the Christian position is only supporting unborn life which, of course, CNN is one giant pro-abortion pack. Don't even get me started on that. I mean, everybody who works. So you can't work for Jeff Zucker unless you're, abortion. You know, you can't be a colleague of Jake Tapper's unless, abortion, women's rights. Not going to happen. But Cuomo is saying that the Christian position is not to care about people afterwards. Why would it be okay for him to slander human beings in this way? What he's really doing is taking a shot at traditional Christian belief, which is rooted in actual morality and not what you see from a lot of these reformed Protestant sects out there. I don't want to get too, I'm not trying to start a religious war here, but that are like, everyone can do whatever they want, man. And like, we're just cool with everything. And there's no rules. And like the Bible says whatever you want it to say. And it's all, I mean, there's a lot of that out there. A lot of social justice church talk. Yeah, give all your stuff to the poor. The church isn't doing that, though. I mean, the people that are telling you that from the church, they have the public to fund their housing and their food and everything else. But everybody else, give all your stuff to the poor. If you won't do that, you don't really care. You're not really a disciple of Jesus. Anyway, Cuomo's, honestly, his show is unwatchable garbage. It always has been. And people have now really understood that. And the guy's a fraud. That's why he's so insecure. That's why he threatens to hurt people who say, people say horrible stuff to me online, in person, all the time. I mean, it's just stuff happens. Don't run around, I'm gonna ruin your blank and throw you down the blanking stairs and blah, blah, blah. Especially, he's really tough when he outweighs the guy that he's yelling at by about 60 or 70 pounds. And he's some little twerp who's just trying to, get a giggle out of his dumbass friends. I mean, I'm not saying what they did to Cuomo was cool. You shouldn't yell at celebrities or newscasters or whatever in public. But he didn't have to threaten severe violence against the guy either. That's just absurd. But he's a moron, and CNN employs a lot of them. And CNN is the worst single place in the traditional legacy American news media now. The worst newspaper is the New York Times. The worst cable channel, TV journalism center is CNN. And this is just the reality, so we might as well understand that. Anyway, so what he says is dumb, big surprise. And then, but back to the looting and how I feel like there's not nearly enough of a focus on how much this damages people and how wrong it really is. You have Seattle council member Tammy Morales just saying out loud, but I guess a lot of left-wing libs think, play 5.
But what I don't want to hear is for our constituents to be told to be civil, not to be reactionary, to be told that looting doesn't solve anything. And, it does make me wonder and ask the question why looting bothers people so much more than knowing that across the country, Black men and women are dying every day and far too often at the hands of those who are sworn to protect and serve.
Looting bothers people more than Black people dying, is what she just said. This is moronic. I mean, this is stupid beyond words. That's not true. Who says that? We don't like either of these things. But as I've already explained to you, you have a very small number of African Americans who are unarmed and killed by the police in suspicious circumstances in any given year. Of the millions and millions and millions of arrests that are occurring in any given year. But they elevate this to be emblematic. They elevate this to somehow be what is typical when it is not. That's a lie. This is all based in a lie. And the lie is that people really have to go around in fear. The African American community has to go around in fear of police shooting them for no reason. It's not true. And as I keep telling you, about twice as many white people are killed by cops every year as African Americans. So, are white people all walking around, oh my gosh, the cops are going to kill me. Everyone hates police violence. Everyone hates police brutality. And look, everyone kind of gets annoyed when the cops are a little too much of a stickler for the rules on stuff. We all get that. Right? I've had cops say, I've had one or two interactions with the Secret Service where I was like, you guys are a bunch of bozos. Okay, so we've all had our times when, we get a little hot under the collar dealing with law enforcement. I get that. But to pretend that this is this imminent threat to life and that it's all rooted in racism and to say that, why does looting bother you so much more than, who says that? This is just a make-believe argument that this member of the Seattle City Council has come up with. Everyone, including the President of the United States, every Republican I know was horrified by what happened to George Floyd. And we have to keep somehow repeating this. There was no change in the narrative here. Everyone goes, oh my God, that's terrible. Lock that cop up. Prosecute him. What's really the standard that we're supposed to hold law enforcement to? I just want to know if one black person a year was killed by the cops in circumstances that were, and I'm not saying that happened, but I'm trying to establish a point here. If one black person in the United States was killed by law enforcement under circumstances that everyone agreed was wrong and was murder, would that justify ransacking of neighborhoods, attacking of strangers in the streets? Okay. 10? Does that justify it? Yeah, okay, maybe it's getting a little closer. I mean, the number we're really at is somewhere like 50 to 70 in any given year that are circumstances that are admittedly bad. Does that justify then year after year we're going to have riots and people burning down buildings? And also, what about the innocence of those who are caught in this who didn't do anything? How can you claim to be for justice when you are using unjust ends to make your point? It undermines the very argument they pretend that they have, which is that there's some need to raise awareness about injustice in the system. And this again, it brings us back to what do they, and this is the question that really enrages the people who are the ones that are doing these apologias for the protesters all the time. And not for when I say protesters, I mean protest/rioters. No one has to apologize for or defend the protesters. That's fine. You want to protest, protest. You want to go out, as I saw in Times Square with my own eyes yesterday, you want to go out and hold up signs, end racism? Good job. That's really going to work. Sure, whatever. But you're allowed to do that. That's fine. I don't think anybody who is particularly intelligent, insightful, or wise believes that really has any effect on anything, but it's fine. If you want to hold up end racism signs, go for it. But for those who are taking the more extreme measures into their hands here, for the members of Antifa and the looters and everyone else, I just want to know what makes the looting stop? What makes the looting stop? And for anyone who burglarizes a house, let's say, for anyone who steals from a store, robs a bank in the weeks ahead, in 3 months, do they still get to use the "this was for George Floyd" defense? Because I saw the graffiti myself. George Floyd spray painted outside of stores that have nothing to do with George Floyd that were looted, that were ruined. When does the George Floyd defense for illegal activity fade? You see, when you have the mob acting on emotion and rage, there are no answers to these questions. All they have is that aggression and those demands of, I do what I want, you comply or else. That's it. There's no argument. There's no raising of awareness here that's going to benefit anybody. And they can't answer to these questions. What would make things better? Oh, I know. We'll have some, so-called law enforcement experts or oh my God, the libertarian. Look, I get it. Libertarians, you hate cops. We get it. Okay, I understand. You're still going to call a cop if someone's breaking into your house in the middle of the night. But I know libertarians hate cops. They write all these books about how terrible cops are all the time. Great. But for everybody else, I just want to, and they'll come up with some, if we only do, less mass incarceration, or, if we, you think that's going to prevent one cop from a routine arrest from killing somebody because he's acting like a psycho? Do you think so? Or we're going to what? We're going to scale down a little bit of the war on drugs, and that's going to stop. This is very similar to the arguments you'll hear when there's gun control fights. Some psychopath will go into a crowded area and start shooting people up with, a pistol, and they'll say, well, let's ban AR-15s. What does that have to do with anything? Oh, but I'm coming up with policy solutions. No, they're not coming up with policy solutions. They're pushing political agendas and using a tragedy to do it. That's what's happening with this George Floyd situation, and we're all being dragged through this.
Whether we like it or not, this COVID epidemic has basically shut down the country the last 3 months. And by the way, if we shut it down a month earlier, we'd have probably another 45 to 60,000 people be alive instead of dead, because he didn't listen to, and I'm going to say something outrageous, he didn't listen to guys like me back in January saying we have a problem, the pandemic is on the way.
Yeah, you didn't listen to guys like me back in January I said, we have a problem. Oh, thanks, Joe. Yeah, we all knew there was a problem with COVID-19, you abject fool. But you're saying now the president should have shut down a month earlier? No, wrong lesson, idiot. He shouldn't have shut down the country at all. At all. There should have been public health and education campaigns about ways to engage in personal mitigation. People at high risk should have been defended. Certain tailored reductions in large gatherings should have been made at the city and state level. But a national level economic shutdown for every state across the country, including ones that never even had an epidemic? Wrong lesson from Joe Biden, which is scary. But even beyond that, yeah, I said there was a problem, and we all knew there was a problem. But notice how he's trying to suggest that he would have shut the country down a month earlier, except he never said that, and we would know, and we could look at the records. Joe Biden's a liar. This guy's a clown. But remember, they want you to know, if only confused old Magoo, Mr. Magoo Biden, if he were in charge, everything would be fine. We'd all be safe. Oh, and I'm sure the riots would end tomorrow, too.